economic recovery. President Donald Trump says he is optimistic about the U.S. and financial prosperity. We're at the White House. A valid baptism. Why the Vatican is speaking out regarding one of the 7 sacraments. Birthplace of Christ. An update on how the global coronavirus pandemic is affecting one of the most sacred sites in the world. And back to school. The Catholic University of America makes a decision on tuition during the coronavirus pandemic. On EWTN News Nightly for Thursday, August 6th, 2020. Good evening, and thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Tracy Sable. President Donald Trump heads to Ohio to talk economic prosperity, but the coronavirus keeps him from meeting with the state's top leader. Meanwhile, more Americans file for unemployment and an aid package up on the Capitol Hill remains elusive. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports. Owen?
Tracy, this coming weekend, President Trump does some fundraising for his campaign. But first, he stopped in Ohio to visit the Whirlpool Corporation, talking jobs and economic prosperity. And there was one key person, he could not meet.
Before boarding Marine One, President Donald Trump hopeful in the search for a weapon to fight back against the virus.
Vaccines are doing very, very well. We had some good talks this morning on vaccines and on therapeutics. A lot of good things are happening.
Then later in Ohio, the president wished the governor well and talked about jobs, too.
Governor of Ohio, DeWine, just tested positive just here, and we want to wish him the best. He'll be fine. We stood up to the foreign cheaters. We defended American jobs. We imposed massive tariffs on foreign washing machines. And we saved the workers of Whirlpool.
President Trump's trip comes as news that nearly 1.2 million laid-off Americans applied for jobless benefits last week. And in Congress, that much talked-about aid bill still on the negotiating table. One Democratic senator blames Republicans.
What are they doing that's much more important than being in that room to make decisions for 30 million people to receive their unemployment, not just for a week at a time, but for the rest of this year, or at least until the economy turns around?
Counselor to the president, Kellyanne Conway, sees it differently.
He is personally involved, and you know that. He's the president of the United States. He's ready to sign into law relief packages. He was ready last Friday to do a 1-week extension of the $600 benefit, and the Democrats said no. They didn't say no. They think they're saying no to him. They're saying no to America.
And as the battle against the virus drags on, another plea for young people who may feel invincible to understand this.
And even though it may not impact you in a negative way, the chances are you're going to infect someone who'll infect someone who then has an underlying condition or is elderly and can really get into trouble.
Also tonight, Catholic leaders are asking Congress for help in the next COVID relief bill. Many parochial schools have closed or are in danger of closing. They'd like to see low-income families get help to pay tuition. Tracy?
Okay, thank you so much, Owen. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reporting for us tonight. Joe Biden is launching a new national ad aimed at Black Americans. In it, the presumptive Democratic nominee for president urges Black Americans to stand up to President Donald Trump in the same way their ancestors stood up to, quote, violent racists of a generation ago. The ad is meant to drum up support ahead of the November elections. Beirut, Lebanon remains in shambles following Tuesday's deadly explosion. As the international community pledges to aid the hurting city, some Lebanese are demanding political reform now. Correspondent Mark Irons reports.
This French plane is packed with medical supplies bound for Lebanon. Beirut reeling after a downtown explosion killed more than 130 people, wounded thousands more, and leaves over 250,000 people homeless. The blast is believed to have erupted when a fire ignited tons of highly explosive ammonium nitrate. Authorities had left it sitting in a warehouse for years.
I don't believe it's an accident.
Nemet Frem, a member of the Lebanese parliament, says at the very least the explosion was caused by negligence. When I spoke with him today, he was about to go to a funeral. Frem knows people who were killed and injured in the blast. Today, he is demanding political reform in Lebanon.
We can't accept the level of unprofessionalism, of corruption, and of self-serving projects.
Many Lebanese agree. Cries for a revolution came from the streets today as French President Emmanuel Macron visited the city. Macron assured residents he would speak with leaders about a new political pact.
And I will come back by September 1st, and if they have not obtained it, I will take my responsibilities with you. Tell them, tell them.
Meanwhile, signs of sympathy for Beirut appearing all over the world, including outside the Lebanese embassy in Washington, D.C. Paul Gadala lives in D.C. now, but he spent 6 years as a journalist in Beirut.
Literally almost all of my friends have had their windows and doors blown out. One is sadly homeless, another has lost both his businesses.
Gadala says recovery in Lebanon will take time.
Lebanon's economic activity and cultural life is centered in around the port in downtown Beirut, and now those areas are, extremely damaged.
In Washington, Mark Irons, EWTN News Nightly.
Well, North Korea is quarantining thousands of people in the city of Kaesong after claiming in June that it was free of the coronavirus. North Korea's news agency released photos of leader Kim Jong-un meeting with top advisors. The emergency response to the lockdown of Kaesong, plus the stream of propaganda glorifying its virus efforts, are raising concerns that North Korea may be getting worried about a spike in cases of COVID-19. National elections in Sri Lanka pass without a glitch and a huge turnout despite the ongoing coronavirus pandemic.
We are happy to say that it's a very, very peaceful election.
The chairman of Sri Lanka's election commission says over 70% of voters cast ballots. The election was supposed to take place in April, but was postponed twice because of the coronavirus pandemic. Ballot counting has already started. The final results are expected tomorrow. The city of Bethlehem, which typically draws millions of visitors every year, is now struggling because of the coronavirus pandemic. The Church of the Nativity stands on the spot where Jesus was born. People in Bethlehem were expecting over 4,000 tourists for Easter this year, but no one showed up. The church closed in March and reopened in May. However, travel restrictions make it difficult for visitors. Hindus are celebrating the launch of a new temple in India. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi broke ground for the temple to the Hindu god Ram. He offered prayers at foundation stones for the temple, but Muslims are accusing Modi of stoking religious tensions. The temple is being built on the site of a 16th century Muslim mosque that was destroyed by Hindus rioting in 1992 that left 2,000 people dead. The Archbishop of Nicaragua is saying that there is no way a fire that destroyed an ancient crucifix was an accident. Cardinal Leopold Brenes is describing the attack as, quote, an act of terrorism. Photos from earlier this week show a 382-year-old wooden crucifix severely damaged. Police reported the fire was an accident. The Vatican is asking Nicaragua to fully investigate. Pope Francis is expressing his closeness to Japan on today's 75th anniversary of the bombing of Hiroshima. The tolling of bells and a moment of silence earlier today in Hiroshima, where the Prime Minister laid a wreath of flowers at the Peace Memorial. The Pope sent a message to Hiroshima's governor. In it, the Holy Father recalled how he was able to reflect on the destruction at the Peace Memorial when he visited last November. The Vatican has released a document on what constitutes a valid baptism. A letter from the Holy See's Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith says in part, quote, it is fundamental that the sacramental action may not be achieved in its own name, but in the person of Christ who acts in his church and in the name of the church. More analysis is Hannah Brockhouse, senior Rome correspondent for Catholic News Agency. Hannah, so good to see you. So what prompted this letter from the Vatican over baptisms?
Well, Tracy, the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith noticed that there were some cases of ministers of baptism changing the words that are used to baptize someone. So using, instead of the formula, I baptize you in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, it was changed to include at the beginning in the name of the community, the parents, the godparents, and we baptize you in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. So the letter today, the congregation said this is not a valid form of baptism to change these words. They said they called it an arbitrary modification of the form, and they reaffirmed that it should be I baptize you because the minister of the sacrament is doing so in the name of Jesus Christ, who baptizes. And so they also said with this answer that anyone who has been baptized in this, with this changed wording, is not validly baptized and should be baptized.
Hannah, how rare is it for a sacrament to be clarified?
Well, probably the need for it is not rare enough, unfortunately. But it is the responsibility of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith to defend the Church's teaching. So that's what they're doing here, and it is something that they do from time to time. They've done it with baptism before. They've also issued documents clarifying things such as the proper burial of cremated remains and many other issues.
I want to get to some other Vatican news. I know the Pope appointed new members to the Vatican's Council of Economy. Who are they and what is their importance?
Well, that's right. The Pope nominated several new members, among them 6 cardinals. He also nominated 7 new lay members, and among these were 6 women. This is a novelty since this council was established by Pope Francis in 2014. There have been lay men, but not women, on the council. And the council is responsible, the Council for the Economy is responsible for overseeing Vatican finances across all of its departments, and including overseeing the work of the Secretariat for the Economy. So it is quite important.
Well, Hannah, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. Hannah Brockhouse, Senior Rome Correspondent for Catholic News Agency. Thanks again, Hannah.
Thank you.
Coming up, Pope Francis accepts the resignation of a church leader from Minnesota for health reasons. A just-published study is providing a look at Americans' views on religious freedom, and it finds overall a majority of Americans agree with the protections guaranteed by the First Amendment. The poll conducted by the AP Nork Center for Public Affairs Research and the University of Chicago Divinity School found before the COVID-19 outbreak in the U.S., 78% of those who responded said Americans should be able to practice any religion without government restriction. Joining me now on Skype to talk more about the importance of protecting religious freedom is Andrea Paciani, National Catholic Register contributor that is, and legal analyst. Andrea, welcome back. Always so good to see you.
Tracy, thank you so much for the invitation.
Absolutely. So what do you make of this survey, and what stands out the most to you?
You know, I think it's really important reminder that religious freedom is our first freedom. It's kind of built into the DNA of Americans. What's very interesting about the study, though, is it was conducted before the pandemic and a lot of the restrictions in place to try to curb the spread of coronavirus. And since then, the same group that created the study looked at the role of faith and spirituality in Americans, and they responded, a quarter of them said that their faith and their spirituality became even more important during this time. So I would assume even more Americans would say religious freedom, our right to not only worship, but to express our faith, is really an important part of who we are and what our government should be promoting.
And Andrea, I know that you just published a piece on religious liberty policy. What impact do you think the pandemic has had on religious freedom here in America?
Well, I think it's a very troublesome concern. First off, we know that at the very initial stages of the pandemic, there were important regulations and restrictions placed on just Americans' mobility in general. And that restricted our ability to do important things like gather together in worship. And our churches were closed. Many of them are starting to reopen with definite restrictions on what used to be our normal. But I think that it's also the civil unrest that kind of came about during this time of quarantine and isolation also shows that there's a lot of tension and a lot to be remembered about how important our religious history is to who we are, and that we stand strong in defending not only this religious history, but also our future, our ability to gather together, our ability to respond to our neighbors in need, and our ability to continue to spread our faith, especially in the context of our Catholic schools and other religious institutions.
And Andrea, if you don't mind, I want to talk more about a line from your piece. You say, if America loses its enthusiasm for defending religious liberty, what are the implications for religious believers now being horribly persecuted all over the world? So what's at stake here? What do you think, Andrea?
Well, I think our American leadership is very important on so many things. We have been such leaders in showing the importance and the success of democracy, as well as the importance of how a pluralistic society benefits all sectors of our community, whether it's economic or internal security, regional security with our neighbors. When we allow religious freedom to flourish, our country and our people flourish. We have been leading that important charge to teach the rest of the world community the importance of religious freedom at an international level. And the coronavirus pandemic has really put a lot of stress and strain on countries and people and religious freedom. And if we're not able to celebrate and defend and safeguard religious freedom at home, our leadership abroad is going to be very undermined. And that means that there are Christians and other religious minorities that are going to face even greater persecution if they're not getting the support from American leaders in this important area.
Well, Andrea, thank you so much for your time, and always thank you so much for your insights. We really appreciate it.
Tracy, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Lawmakers in Nebraska have given a first round of approval to ban dilation and evacuation abortions. They are hoping to pass the measure before the end of the legislative session. 2 more rounds of voting are required before the proposal could be sent to Governor Pete Ricketts, who says he supports the measure. Pope Francis has accepted the resignation of a bishop from Minnesota over health concerns. Bishop John LeVoir had led the Diocese of New Ulm since 2008. He left last month to be assessed for physical and psychological concerns. In a statement, Bishop LeVoir says it was a privilege to have served the faithful in the diocese of 50,000 Catholics in 60 parishes. Up next, the Catholic University of America says it will adjust tuition for those impacted by the coronavirus pandemic. As the coronavirus pandemic limits class sizes and schedules, the Catholic University of America is now refunding some tuition payments. Starting this fall, only freshmen and transfer students with less than 30 credits will be living in campus dorms. Students who plan to live on campus but can't will receive a housing refund. Upperclassmen who are expecting to return to in-person classes will get 10% of their tuition reimbursed. As debate continues around the country over when and how to reopen schools, several parents in Montgomery County, Maryland, are suing for the right to be able to send their children to private school in person. Joining me now on Skype is Kim Bean, the lead plaintiff in this case. Kim, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for coming on.
Oh, thank you for having me, Tracy. I really appreciate it.
So, Kim, I want to talk about why it was so important for you and the other families to take a stand and to file this lawsuit.
Great question. This is an incredibly important issue, not just to me, but so many other parents of kids in private and parochial schools. What it really boils down to is that, we firmly believe that politicians need to stay out of this, and that non-elected county officials should not have the ability to blanketly close our private and religious schools.
Kim, as a parent, why do you feel so strongly about having classes in person? And also, would you mind talking about the experience that your children had doing distance learning?
Absolutely. I think that there's no secret. I mean, it's been out through the American Academy of Pediatrics, and there have been so many experts who have come out to say in-person classroom learning is really most optimal for students. And we really believe that it can happen safely. And we believe that this is, you know, the distance learning thing, certainly not for lack of trying. It's just not as optimal, especially for younger kids who need more of the psychosocial, emotional learnings that they get in school as well. And for those of us sending our kids to faith-based schools, you know, there's really a religious element that is hard to replicate from a distance learning perspective. So we really firmly, many of us believe that we want our kids back in school, and we can do so safely. We do feel that, you know, so many schools have spent so much time, effort, energy, resources, et cetera, to put the plans in place to be able to open safely, not just for our kids. I'm a mom, safety is first and foremost in my mind, but also for our beloved faculty. So we really think that there's a way to do this, to follow the CDC guidelines, the state guidelines. My school in particular had done that. And it's a shame that the county really hadn't taken the time to even look at our plans.
Kim, can you talk about some of those precautionary measures that were put into place?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's interesting. Our school had a summer program that they held on campus, and it really served as sort of a good test run. So my children were part of that, as were several others. But what they've done is they took temperatures upon arriving at school. They've spaced all the desks 6 feet apart. There's plexiglass in the classrooms. They're dividing classrooms so that it's really for small group learning. They're not congregating in common areas. And they're repurposing a lot of other areas within the school, cafeterias, church space, et cetera, to be able to host the kids. So they really can spread out. And of course, I neglected to mention the most important thing, they're wearing masks, both the students and the teachers. So those are just some of the examples of the measures that are being taken.
Kim, as you know, there are some other parents and also school administrators who are, you know, expressing concern over those in-person classes. What would you say to them?
I would say I think every school has a plan. Every school that I know of is working on a plan. And it really, first and foremost, should be a choice that the school has as to whether they want to reopen in person or virtually. And then it comes down to parents' comfort levels. So every parent should be privy to their school's plan, and they can make the determination for themselves. Many of these schools, my own included, are giving parents the option to send the kids back in person or to opt for a virtual learning path. So it really should be the decision of the school and then the decision of the parents, not the politicians.
Oh, Kim Bean, thank you so much for coming on, and please keep us posted.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
And finally tonight, Bishop Thomas Tobin of the Diocese of Providence, Rhode Island, made an announcement on Twitter earlier this week. He says the diocese is welcoming 8 seminarians. It is the highest number in nearly 4 decades. Parishes in Providence had been holding Eucharistic adoration every Thursday, asking for an increase in vocations. The bishop says, God said, I will give you shepherds. And indeed, he is. That is wonderful news. And we thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sable. Good night and God bless.